Before we start, let me quickly introduce the panel. So we have Dr. Bigyan Verma here. Hi, Bigyan.
Hi.
Bigyan is currently director at SIES College of Management Studies, Bombay. Bigyan's done his PhD in corporate finance. I don't even know what that means, Bigyan, but sounds scary over there. Bigyan comes with a unique background because he's worked with the academia and he's also been an industry man. He was a senior investment banker. Glad that you could make it for this one, Bigyan.
Thank you.
Samir is a newly minted entrepreneur. He is currently CEO for Accurate Advisory and Consulting. I've known Samir for a while. Sam was previously Chief Strategy Officer at Fractal Analytics. And prior to that, he was a global business leader for Cognizant Technology Solutions in analytics and data science. Sam is also an author, and I have personally read his first book and waiting for more to come in, Sam. Pranjal is our investment professional in this panel. And Pranjal, there are, as I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of expectations from you that you'll be able to bring in views, not just from the industry, but also basis the kind of work you and your team have done with various organizations, including edtech companies as well. So welcome all of you. My first question to you, and Sam, let's start off with you. It's an open-ended question. When we talk about the future of learning, what are your thoughts on this? Or what are the first things that come to mind?
Okay.
Hear you.
Jack, can I start?
Okay, Sam, while you're fixing your audio, Bigyan, if you want, you could start.
Audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, Sam is all good.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for giving me an opportunity to be on this platform. Very topical theme, and I think we've got a great set of panelists and the moderator, of course. But this is my view, and I'll take an approach which is intertwined today, which is future of work, future of education, and future of learning are completely intertwined. They have a high degree of connect. And the reason I say that is because of some of the numbers I want to quote around, because there is a bit of dichotomy which is happening on two sides. One is how our academic institutions are faring in the entire space. And the second is the corporate side of the world. So coming to the academic institutes, we're talking about some 34.8 million students passing out every year from K-12. The 15,000 sum of academic institutions what we have in India, and there are 1.8 million kind of graduates who are engineering pass outs every year. The sum total of the deployability rate of these students are just about 18%. So that means 82% of the students do not land up with the jobs straight away.
And this is not just limited to engineering. You are saying this could be non-tech fields as well.
Absolutely, the management graduates and the other as well.
Second,
sorry?
That's a scary number.
Yes. Second, on the other side, if we talk about India's technology workforce, and India technology workforce contributes about $190 billion annually, growing at a CAGR of about 8 to 10%, employs about 4.4 million professionals. Out of that, 1.8 million professionals are in the redundant, or what I say, archaic skill sets, the .NET or the QA or the old Java guys. Now, if we look at these two streams of professionals and students, definitely the future of education and the future of work seems to be absolutely at the crossroads. And that's where the future of learning comes in, where we are talking about that, look, it's pretty evident from these numbers, one size fits all approach does not work. Let me stop here because at some level, I'm sure we'll dissect, but I just wanted to kind of give a kind of a larger landscape and then maybe during the course of discussion, we'll deep down and kind of double down and kind of dwell further.
Makes sense, Sam. Thanks. But I was really intrigued about those numbers that you were talking about, and I would like to come back to some of that in a while. Begin, would you want to share your take on the future of learning before we move forward?
Good morning, Jack. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to start with a quote of Dr. Vijay Govindrajan. He's a professor of strategy at the Tufts School of Business. And he says, future is not what you'll do in the future. Future is what you will do today. That's how he looks at it. Now, when you talk about the future of learning, to me, I guess it's already here. And it was probably here almost about 10 years back, when something called MOOCs was launched, the massive online open courses by top class institutions like Harvard and Kellogg and Sloan and Massachusetts, Illinois, and so on.
All of those.
Coursera, edX, and were launched long back because they started talking about democratization. Education cannot be limited. If they want inclusive growth of the entire world as such, top class education cannot be limited only to a certain section of people at all. It really has to get democratized and be available at a affordable. Rattled. We were threatened. We thought that we're going to become irrelevant very soon, and these MOOCs will take over, and the traditional institutions will go away. But that didn't happen. The dropout rates in MOOCs was those days was almost as high as 88%. People will register and then drop out.
So Begin, I would want to stop you here for a while. What I hear you saying is that the MOOCs were game changers, but then there are certain constraints that are there with MOOCs. Dropout rates being one of the bigger challenges out there. We'll come back to that when we talk about why those dropout rates are happening and what is it that we can do to kind of mitigate that. But before that, your views as an investor, where do you see the future of learning headed?
Yeah, so I think from an investor's point of view, we always, invest in the future, right? So it's important to have a thesis view or a hypothesis view of what the world would look like 5-10 years down the line. And one interesting point that I would just want to make is I would call it back to future of learning rather than saying future of learning. Let me tell you what I mean by that, right? If you look at 1800s, the time pre-industrial revolution, the primary mode of learning was apprenticeship. You would learn a skill under a mentorship or a tutelage of some person who was already a master, or at least who had certain credentials, and hence that's how the students would learn. And of course, those were hard skills, and hence you had to learn those skills by doing. Then of course the industrial revolution happened, and automation came in, and then books became more important, and kids were sent to school, and all of that happened. But if you ask me, I think we are back to future, because I think increasingly credentials are becoming less and less important, and skilling is becoming more and more important. And what digital has done is it's basically reduce the asymmetry of signaling. Why are credentials important? Credentials are important because obviously, you want to signal to a prospective employer or to a prospective, friend or anybody that, you have certain knowledge and certain, sort of skills, right? But as digital is breaking down that barrier of ascertaining the skills, and as assessments are becoming increasingly digital, skills have taken over from credentials. And what that means is you're back to future, because now you have to again become an apprentice, and you have to again learn by doing. Now that doing can happen online, that doing can happen in social manner, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it later about social learning, etc. But the point I'm trying to make is, interestingly, the way I see it, we are back to future, and I think skills will become more and more important.
I think that's an interesting point you bring up there, Pranjal, and I am going to come back to you on social learning. But I have a question for you now, Sam. Pranjal was talking about skilling. Given the kind of work that you've been doing, and I know that you keep working on, it's not just India. Globally, there is a huge skilling gap. The mechanics might vary. So, for instance, in India, there is a larger skills gap as far as the techies are concerned, or at least the perceived gap is larger there. But even in other markets, whether it's the US, whether it's China, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, there is a skilling gap. How do you see virtual learning addressing the skilling gap? Or do you see it at all?
You want me to go first? Yeah.
That is for you, actually.
Yeah. So the aspect over there is about twofold. One, the gap specifically is not just about in the technology space, but across domains and industry segments. And the reason, if we take the Singapore or Germany or the US or some of these Asia Pac countries like Vietnam or Malaysia, their vocational training institutes are fully developed, fully evolved, fully flourished. So there is a streaming side. I mean, there is a side which goes into the management or the technical side, but the other side, what we say, which is the manufacturing side, or let's say the other skill set side. I mean, let's think about this. Today, India's manufacturing, contribution to the GDP is about 16%, and 14% of the workforce of manufacturing is the overall base of our workforce. Do we have institutes today in mass which talks about these learning and training for these larger workforce? So that's on the one side. Now, definitely to the point what you asked, kind of resonates in terms of a merit today. Online learning has a potential, because let's look at this black swan event, I call it COVID, where seemingly the biggest today spend which is happening across, whether it's the investor community or even by students or the organization, is on the online learning. Now, what other kind of interventions media budgets could not do, COVID has done for us. I'm saying in terms of really accelerating the pace of online learning.
Yeah, if I were to take a euphemistic viewpoint, I would agree with you there.
It's an epiphany, if I call it, kind of a thing, that how exactly this whole thing changed in the last 3-4 months. But the realization was still there, and I would like to leave this particular aspect, which definitely we should discuss. Are we still ensuring, to the point, even what Pranjal said, skills are getting mapped to the jobs, and per the jobs, the competencies are getting created, and the skill gap is getting reduced. Let's not forget, even in the technology space today, the selection ratio in the digital side, which is a sum total for all the exponential technology, is 1:28, which means for one position, I need to interview at least 28 professionals. And that's seemingly not tenable in the longer run.
Sure. So, Pranjal, taking off from where Sam, left us, you're sitting on the boards of various edtech companies, and you have a great sense of that business. Do you think edtech organizations are really working towards addressing that skilling gap, or do you think they're working more towards addressing the knowledge gap?
Yeah. I think the answer varies by geography. And teeing off from where Samir left, I think it all depends on the demand-supply situation in that respective geography, right? So, to his point that there are 28 applicants or at least 28 candidates to one role in India, potentially pre-COVID, that was not the case in the US, right, or in developed geographies where that number could be lower from an application standpoint at least, because the job market is tight.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say, Jagmohan, is that depending on which country you are in, I think you have to either solve both, which is knowledge and skill, or you have to solve one, which is skill. In India, unfortunately, the state is such that you have to solve both. I think fundamentally our traditional education system also is very weak in terms of providing knowledge, the right knowledge. Also, as recruiters and as employers, knowledge is the first threshold that you have to clear before you start demonstrating your skills because of the gap in supply and demand. Coming to a question on edtech companies, I think the in general the companies are solving for skills, but you have to realize that unlike a product, education as a theme and as a service uh, has a very long cycle of attribution, right? I mean, you basically do a particular course, and then that gives you certain skills, and then you go ahead and either search for a job or search for a career within your current organization. Certain kind of feedback loop is longer, right? If you're doing a formal education, it is 4 or 5 years. If you're doing a skilling certification education, it is a year or 2 years, right? So that feedback loop is very long. And hence, while the focus continues to be skilling, in the Indian edtech space, you cannot ignore yet the knowledge part of things. Because of two reasons. Reason number one, traditional education itself is flawed, so the prerequisite of knowledge to attain those skills is not achieved, and hence you have to do that. So if you talk to multiple companies, they'll tell you that, look, we end up spending a couple of weeks just trying to bring the baseline of the class or the cohort to a level where everybody's on the same page as far as knowledge is concerned, right? So that you have to do. That's one. Second is, all said and done, you would need to give some sort of a certificate which would signal that at least the knowledge part is taken care of, because the recruiters are spoiled of choices.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's where the dilemma is, to be honest, in the Indian ecosystem. I do feel that is breaking down slowly. I think recruiters are increasingly becoming more and more skill, affiliated rather than knowledge affiliated. But I think it's going to take some time.
Okay. I'm going to throw that question to Bigyan, and I'm hoping that he's going to pose a challenge to you on some of the stuff that you said. Bigyan, one of the things I caught Pranjal saying was that the Indian education system is flawed. And obviously, he gave very cogent reasons why he believes that. What is your take on that?
Well, Jack, if the traditional institutions have to survive, they have to really play their cards pretty well these days now. Because when you talk about traditional institutions, what does it really mean? Traditional institutions are the ones which, do believe in lecturing and cramming and then examination. That's it. So they emphasize only on the knowing part as such. They're really not getting too much into doing. But trust me, long back, this change started taking place in almost a large number of business schools all over the world as such. Let's take the example of Harvard. Especially after 2008 crisis, subprime crisis, they realized that the same case-based model is not going to work. So they started something called field-based education. Now, field basically is an acronym for Field Immersive Experience for Leadership Development, wherein they actually ask the students to go out and experience the problem as such. So knowledge is important, no doubt about it. I'm not saying that it's not important, but at the same time, the students are sitting in the classrooms for the experience. Remember, they're not there just to get the knowledge, because I'm sure they can learn a lot from just going to the Google and getting all kinds of information. But they're sitting in the classroom essentially for the experience, and that's what these institutions are trying to bring in. Now, these experiences are incorporating both the knowledge and the skill. Now, again, when we talk about the skill, it's not just technical skill which is important today. I'm sure, like the COVID has the importance of the soft skills of the students as such. So these are the things which are really changing. So therefore, institutions are now working on what we call as the immersive education, which actually includes a lot of experiential learning, and of course a bit of and good amount of knowledge sharing also.
So again,
and that's the model which is going to stay here for a long time.
I'll stop you here. In fact, I see one of our participants echoing what you're saying. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, and involve me and I learn. That's Krishnan Subramanian out there.
Absolutely.
And I kind of agree with that. But tell me, I mean, isn't that a little utopian? While all of us talk about it, and I hear academicians also speaking about this, and the industry saying that this is what they really like when they go to institutions to hire. How much of this is really happening? I mean, when you talk about immersive or intuitive learning, how much of that is really happening? Sam, what's your take on that?
Well, I'll be a bit of devil's advocate out here, Jag, simply for the reason I advise a lot of academic institutions in the space of new age technologies and programs. Let me tell you, the puzzle which has been solved so far is about conceptual learning, which is what I'm saying that I completely agree with Bigyan that the programs are becoming fungible. They're ready to unbundle the credit kind of a, let's say, mechanism, because of course there is AICT kind of a, let's say, norms as well, but they're open to kind of have more electives kind of a thing, make it kind of a course revisions, program updates every few months and all, and they've got the industry blended in. The thing which is missing over there as part of the learning enhancement is what I call contextual learning, which is where the whole aspect of case studies, how exactly this is applied in the corporate scenario, and in business simulation, the aspect, even what I say, which was used to be a soft skill, has become essential skills. How often do we teach the learners about negotiation, persuasion, stakeholder management, emotional well-being? And these are the things which are required outside the skills. I think that's where a template, which is a kind of a gold standard, is missing. And I think that's where many of the edtech platforms have an advantage, because they have kind of created the courses, one which is absolutely punctuated the technology. It's like a Netflix model. You can actually restart from where you left, because you are not being told, you are just being guided through that. And second, it's a learning which is on the go. To the point, it's immersive, intuitive, and interactive, which means I can pick up the credits I want. I can pick up the course what I want. I'll give an example out here. My 12-year daughter keeps on saying to me that why I need to study geography if I can know any location across the world by latitude and longitude, which is the point. In a simple way, India is keeping tab of China today just by longitude and latitude. It's not about the geography. So somewhere, that aspect of how do I relate, contextualize, and make it meaningful for the learners so that their deployability, first thing I alluded to, goes up.
Samir, just on that one, as a side point, you're lucky that that's what your 12-year-old is asking you. My 12-year-old asked me, why do I need to learn geography? Because there's Google Maps. I can find anything on Google Maps, right? So
my 18-year-old has been asking me why she needs to understand the workings of the human neural system. She has to become an investment banker. So there you are. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Sam and Pranjal. Okay, let's take this to a different level. Because I noticed that we have people from the academia and industry both. India has. Okay, let's not talk about India. Let's talk a little more global. So everybody here is familiar with what the learning management system is, the LMS, right?
Yeah.
Now, there has been a lot of talk of replacing the LMS with the LXP, which is the learning experience platform. Okay. And one of the thoughts behind that has been that the LMS is more administrator focused, whereas the LXP will be more learner focused. There are a lot of people who are baying for blood and saying that the LMS should be, out of business. It's the LXP which should be. A lot of people who are saying, the LXP will never replace the LMS. Very quickly, Bigyan, what's your take? LMS or LXP? Or do you think both will stay, or neither will stay, something else will come up?
I will talk about LMS versus LEP by giving an example of what we call as the Gallup's employer satisfaction survey. So If you really look at the student satisfaction survey from LMS, they're happy, no doubt about that. But are they really missing out something? Because when I conduct or when I speak to the students, a lot of students don't seem to be engaged in the institutional activities or whatever support we provide. Maybe there's something really wrong. LMS is fine from the admin point of view. You put in all the contents, and then the students can get an access to that, this and that. But is there any personalized interaction through the LMS? No, it's not. LMS, I suppose. Now we live in an AI world. Now everything AI is really, really coming in everywhere. I guess LMS AI also has to get in AI and start addressing the cognitive aspect of the students' issues or the faculty's
Okay.
concerns and all, and that's what we call the LEP. So
So
that's
what you're
it's
saying is
crucial.
that
I've not experienced it much, but I
so what you're saying is that the LMS could be made more personalized. That would make a lot more sense, which is actually getting into the
absolutely
LXP LEP domain, right? Uh,
right.
Sam, what's your take on that, very quickly, before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, so one thing for some of the kind of says around LMS, because the market is about $4 billion, so that's why I think there is a monetization. That's why they are saying okay, it exists. LXP is just about 300 million, but growing at a CAGR of 50%. So that's where the real. But I would advocate for something that, just like I give an analogy, that will Tata Sky will remain relevant in the times of OTT channels? Will kind of a, let's say, Amazon will not get into healthcare or other kind of industry segments? It's a question we got to ask, that beyond LXP, if AI has to come in, it will be a learning on the go. Each one of us will have our curated learning pedagogies, delivery content, and created kind of a mechanism to get assessed, not by the scoring pattern, but how much attentive I am actually during the course of discussion, not through in terms of what I score, but versus through my facial recognition. So if I have more crow's feet while I'm speaking, that means there is a sign of kind of a concern, because I'm attentive, but I have a worry which is telling time, sign on my face. These are the expressions what AI will capture, what I call data from the non-obvious sources, to tell the faculty that look, your learners need a very different kind of a, maybe a program, maybe a kind of a pedagogy, or maybe kind of a scenario where they may not be rightly kind of a, let's say, geared up for the market. I'll just keep it short, but maybe during the due course we'll talk about what we are saying.
No, and that makes sense, because when you're looking at a lot of edtech platforms, um, including MOOCs, for instance, MOOCs, you might have a few thousand users registered for a course. In some of the other edtech platforms, especially online learning and skilling certifications kind of platforms, you have anywhere between 150 to 300 people registered for a particular course. Physically impossible for any faculty to really be clued on in terms of what's going on in the mind of the learner. But what I hear you saying, Sam, is that with AI and other tech enablement, you can actually figure out a lot of that and then take preemptive measures to address that, right?
Absolutely. Just to keep it brief, what I'm saying, there is a next evolution beyond LXP where we are talking about maybe Netflix model, whatever that platform would be. But more importantly, that would be AI specific, personalized, and adaptive learning for each one of the learners.
Right.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Amazon there. Uh, so I have a question for Pranjal. Pranjal, Amazon's almost like a household name, right? And they've been quite helpful even during the time of COVID with a lot of essential supplies. Uh, Companies like Amazon, right? Large global Amazon-like companies um, have become fairly understandable. Do you see something like that happening in the learning space?
Yeah, no, I think, Jagmohan, we discussed this very briefly earlier. And I think at the expense of sticking my neck out on this particular point, on this topic, I would say that actually education is a very exciting service offering which should potentially have similar global large online players like Amazon in the next 20 odd years, if not 10 odd years. And I'll sort of go a little bit behind the ingredients of this, right? And why am I making that statement? So if you look at Amazon, right? I mean, in the offline world, what typically what happens is consumption was very catchment specific. And of course, if you have a large global player like a Walmart, you would have to go catchment by catchment and, hence build that reach. But what tech enables you to do is to curate the supply and to understand the consumer in a manner that you can start matching the right supply to the right consumer, and of course then deliver it in the right fashion. For products it's easier, because for products what happens is once a consumer consumes a particular product, the reinforcement of that pleasure of consumption is faster, and you keep coming back for more and more because the frequency of consumption of various products happens more and more. Now you flip that to education. In education, in certain categories, for example, if you talk about higher education and continuous education, the taxonomy and the needs of learning are now becoming globalized, right? If you're talking about the skills that we're talking about in India are the same skills that we're talking about in the US, in Europe, right? Very similar taxonomy of skills. Second, increasingly the adoption to learn online is rising. Of course, COVID has helped. And now you have consumers who are either forced or by virtue of their own, they are able to come online. Third, if you look at the technology, and we talked about LXPs, right? The technology has evolved to a level where you can get personalized attention, which basically means that each student or each learner can potentially be more satisfied than they would have been otherwise. So if the consumption, if I may use that word loosely, or if the learning needs are similar, the skill needs are similar, the tech has evolved to a level where it can be personalized to your needs, and the barrier to learn online is breaking down by every minute. I don't see a reason why there cannot be a horizontal platform like Amazon who can stitch the right kind of supply of programs and courses, etc., and match it with the student. I think MOOCs were the first attempt, if you ask me. MOOCs were actually the first attempt to do it. And I think like any other business model, it will go through its journey of evolution. We're also invested in a couple of companies which are trying to build something like that. And we have global companies like Eruditus, Emeritus, which are doing that across the globe now. So I do feel that in the next decade or so, you would see a player like Amazon in the education space.
So from a scale perspective, I do see that happening in some of the larger MOOCs. But again, I mean, even if you compare the likes of Coursera or Udemy, for instance, of course, very different MOOCs, different focus, but still a long, long distance to go before they reach a level of, say, an Amazon or some of the other players that we spoke about.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And maybe I'll just make one last point on this one. If you look at Amazon, while it's a marketplace, it controls the consumer experience.
Yep.
And hence the attribution is always to Amazon, while you get a stuff from somebody else, right? Some other seller. I think that is the key. And once these MOOCs or these online companies are able to figure that piece out on ensuring that the consumer experience is great and the attribution is on their platform, right? And of course, you recall our previous conversation, lady said credentials are no more important. Once that happens, and that happens consistently across geographies, you will see an Amazon of education.
Thanks, Pranjal. Sam, my next question is for you. Personalized learning or adaptive learning, this term has gained a lot of momentum over the last 2-3 years. Given the kind of work that you do, especially from our audience's perspective, where do you think personalized learning is today? Where do you see it moving over the next few years? And feel free to add your own, wildly wild kind of thoughts. You can actually try and predict stuff.
No, I think it's a very interesting question what you asked, and there are various shades and layers of this. If I just do a pullback, first of all, to Pranjal's point, I do agree that today there is a reason why there is so much of emphasis on learning. I'll tell you the reason why, because since our life expectancy has gone up, I mean, take out the COVID as an outlier, but each one of us today realize that our career has to be about not just 25, 30 years, it has to be much longer, which means given the changes in the space of our exponential technologies, the careers are staggered every 2, 3 years in terms of what we say, okay, let's look at what we can do for next 2 years and see what's next when that time horizon comes in, which means learning, continuous learning has to be there every 2, 3 years. And I give this colloquial thing as part of saying this thing, just like we have roti, kapda, makan, and data as 4 elements, we should have learning as part of our month-old budgets as well, baked in, because that's the reality, irrespective of the stage of the careers we are. Second thing is, if we talk about the aspect, what you said about adaptive or personalized learning, we are at a stage what I call 2.0. The first stage, as we know in the learning or education, was about pedagogy, instructor led kind of a learning. Instructor was a sage, whatever he or she says, we all agree. And a lot of us in this panel have gone through that kind of a learning in our formative years. The current stage is what we call andragogy, which is about the instructor has become more like enabler. There is a kind of a content which is coming in, getting streamed. But the third stage, which will be more like personalized, would be what I call heutagogy, which will be a stage where learner and content will be table stake. It's like how I build my own program, content, and even the end aspect. I'll give you that analogy, what the future is all about. Now, for some of us who are using Netflix, it's interesting what Netflix is what they are thinking about in the future to come, and already they have lined up production houses who are working on this, which is like what we call cliffhanger moments. Now, if many of us in the audience and this panel, I'm sure would have seen Sholay. For some of us, if Jug didn't like the end of Amitabh Bachchan prematurely during much before the climax, or Pranjal didn't like Gabbar Singh hands amputated, can I change those cliffhanger moments? If you look at today how the serials are streamed on Netflix, for every end of that session, there is a cliffhanger moment where you are intrigued to kind of get the streaming of the next episode. And that's exactly what the learning would be. If I have to study, let's say biology, only a specific, and then I know through my interest level, content is building around that, and I just don't study biology, but I also maybe study sociology because some of my interest areas as part of my learning are getting deciphered by image, voice, text, and video, which is where the AI element comes in. I will be in a shape to say, look, I'm not only an expert in biology, but the adjacent category of maybe sociology, psychology, and maybe design thinking. Thing in point over there, I give an example. Why I'm talking about this, you take, and I've met with many of these blockchain experts, cryptocurrency experts, and cybersecurity hackers, ethical ones. None of them are IM or IT's pedigree guy. They learned on the go, and they had their own understanding how to go about and solve this particular.
Cogent point there, Sam. I'm more or less with you there. Which brings me to my next question, and that's for Began. And Began, you're back just in time.
I know, but something went wrong.
There is this oft misunderstood term, which is social learning. And I don't want to prompt you out there. So let me first ask you, where do you think social learning, or what social learning has to contribute to the success of learning in general in the future? Let's start with that, and then we'll get into a little more details there if required. How do you see social learning contributing to the future of learning?
Jag, when I interact with the students who are going to take admission this year, most of them, in fact, all of them are looking forward to these kind of next 2 years in their career, because they were excited about which is going to put them on a pedestal where they can probably take off in the days. They were excited because they really wanted to experience the campus life. They were excited that they will interact with the students and sit in the canteen and loiter here and there, which probably which COVID-19 has kind of literally made it very, very impossible as such. And I don't think any platform, any virtual platform of or immersive learning or blended learning is really going to replace that kind of experience at all. These kids are socially connected, of course, digitally with on various using various platforms, and but they are really lacking it. But the kind of interaction they wanted from the campus life as such. So I personally believe that education or whatever be the case in the days to come, they would need to be here only as a as a substitute, or it should really help in the efficiency of the entire education system as such, but it cannot replace the
So
kind
what I
of traditional model which we
it won't
already have.
replace how social learning happens in the traditional space. But tell me, I mean, what about stuff like enabling collaborative learning amongst people? Pranjal's kid might be here in India. Let's say Sam's kid is in the US. What if you cannot be at the same place physically, but you could use technology to still enable collaborative learning, and that's a fairly sizable part of social learning, if you ask me. Uh, so, do you not see social learning contributing in that sense to learning in the future?
Sorry, Kudmo, you're asking me or Vigyan, Dr. Vigyan?
Generally, to the panel. I mean,
Okay, so
Begyan had his views, and I
yeah.
respect that. But I'm saying, what about you and Sam?
Sure, sure. No, so maybe I'll chip in, right? I think it's not a binary answer. I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. While I partially agree with what Dr. Bigyan is saying in terms of the offline environment being a necessity, and hence online may potentially never be able to replace offline. But there are certain elements in the online world which can be done much better than in the offline world. To your point on collaboration, for example, I'll give you an anecdote. In one of our companies, we run
Yeah.
what is called as a meeting moderator. It's a tool developed with MIT, where basically you simulate a negotiation environment, and there are 4 or 5 people who are negotiating on a particular topic, and the meeting moderator is basically a sort of a perception AI-based tool which tells who is learning from that conversation, who is bullying that conversation, who is silencing that conversation, etc. And then they give that feedback to each individual and help them learn in a more collaborative fashion, right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is, if you look at a trend, I think increasingly you will see a lot more shift of social learning happening online, especially collaborative learning. That is bound to happen. I think COVID has significantly accelerated that adoption curve, and hence increasingly, like how learners have social identities and they have a social network, they'll also have a social learning path. Having said that, I think the contribution of offline cannot fully go away, and there would be examples or use cases where you have to have a offline touch point, and that offline touch point today is more about community. For example, a lot of edtech companies, what they do is they're primarily online, but they organize these community catch-ups just to know each other, build some sort of an emotional connect, because in online world you may not potentially be able to build an emotional connect, right? So that's one angle of social learning. So I think that is bound to happen. It will happen. But I think the blend between online and offline with respect to social learning will increasingly shift towards online. And of course, events like COVID are only accelerating that process.
Add to this, Judge, if I
Jack,
may.
can I just chip in for a minute?
Sure.
Yeah, like the entire education, higher education or whatever, is essentially made of three different components. What we call as the curricular activities, the co-curricular activities, and extracurricular activities. So a good and reasonable use of digitization and also the offline is probably required at all these levels. Maybe at the curricular level, substantial amount of integration can happen for online, for blended. For co-curricular, maybe or offline interactions, that's probably could be important. And extracurricular again is a lot of so what I'm just saying is a justified blend of both traditional model and the digital model is needed at all these three levels. The intensity might
And began
in
realistically speaking,
all of
that
them.
is what will happen in all probability. Uh, I don't see traditional learning getting replaced anytime soon. I guess what
Absolutely.
Pranjal was also probably suggesting was that um, social learning through the virtual mode will probably supplement, what is happening in the traditional
Man
sense.
is a social animal.
Absolutely,
They say
absolutely.
man is a social animal.
In fact, that was the theory behind when Bandura came up with his concept of social learning so many years ago. That's
Yeah.
exactly where he started from. Okay, we have exactly 3 minutes before I start taking questions from the participants. So very quickly, here's a question for each of you. Um, just tell me what you think as an ABC, and then maybe we can have participants asking questions on that. Pranjal, starting with you. What are the three major innovations you think we are going to see in the domain of learning over the next few years?
Um, AI very clearly. I think AI will sort of clearly have a huge impact on learning. So that's definitely one. Uh, Interestingly, on the other side of the spectrum, instructors. I think the way instructors are teaching today will be very, very, different from what they are supposed to be teaching in future. So I think that is going to really impact the education days. Uh, and third, to be honest, I would say skills. I think what we are looking at and presuming that those skills will remain relevant for 10 years, I think that's not the case. It will change dramatically. And I see a renaissance of arts and creativity and all of that coming back significantly, while I think the entire topic is around tech. But actually, I have a contrarian view. I think there'll be two schools of, or two clusters. One cluster will be tech, and the other cluster will be art. And the one in the middle is what is under a threat because they'll have to choose sides. So it sort of becomes very polarized. I
So
think
I,
those three.
I hear you say AI, the pedagogical difference, and a more holistic approach to the way the course is being structured. Sam, what about you? What are your two takes there for the future?
I'm just taking a very future forward peek, and some of them maybe a kind of a, let's say, provocative. Jack, one is, of course, the days of the large monolithic building and campuses seems to be getting over. I would rather see campuses, university getting housed maybe in the workplaces, like WeWork or next to like the SCCs or the industrial hubs, because that's where the talent can blend with the learning and, of course, with the job opportunity. Second, completely agree with Pranjal. I give it a word called liberal learning, where AI meets design, cognitive science, behavioral science put together, where we are talking about how do you design for the subconscious mind. Third thing is, to me, it's like skills, competencies will be kind of gauged on online on a real-time basis. If we see the trend happening, GitHubs and Kaggle are the manifestation that learning can happen on the go, because when you get a score on Kaggle, it's equally implied that if the score is good, you get a job. So that's where I think some of these social learning platforms will actually become the manifestation for the employers to say, look, we can hire the talent on the go.
Yep. I'm with you on a lot of those things. Actually, what Pranjal and you have said, both of you, resonates beautifully with me. Uh, Begin, what are your three wishes out there?
I, I would probably be repeating what Sam and Pranjal talked about. So without saying anything like that, I just want to tell you something. What again, VG earlier, and he says is that if we solve all the problems of the world today, but not related to education, make sure the next generation will have all the problems. But if you solve just one problem that is related to education today and none of the other problems, make sure the next generation will solve all the problems. Now here we have suddenly woken up. The COVID has accelerated this kind of realization amongst the faculty, amongst the parents, that they were not really ready for this kind of disruption. And mind one thing, viruses will keep coming back. 1918, there was a massive attack, 50 million people died, and after that, Ebola and SARS and whatnot happened, and they keep on changing their the mutations will keep on happening, and something or other will keep coming back to us. Now, disruptions in education will happen also because of viruses. Were we ready? Trust me, none of us ready. Even the Harvard professors were not ready. Any one of us. So at least the COVID has made us realize. So the education ecosystem is going to change.
Sure.
That's where people like
Sure.
Pranjal and Sam will, integrate all these things and
And
change
I'm
entire
getting people like you as well.
AI, cloud computing. Yes.
Okay. I have a few questions here. So, in no particular order, there is a question: how do edtech firms take care of holistic learning of the individual? Because every individual might have different interests, right? There might be somebody who's interested in AI and somebody who is interested in art. The reason this may be important is that it'll enable people to solve challenges in the workplace creatively. In short, the question is, how do we ensure more personalization? Which one of you might want to pick this up?
Maybe I can go first and allow others to also chip in. It's already happening. If I just see how some of these MOOC and edtech platforms are functioning today, but it's at a very infancy stage. One, the good part is that if we take a whole validation from the market, the government has also recently allowed the second degree option, not optional, but kind of a, let's say they can go in, the students can go in for that, and has to be an online kind of a degree. The thing over there to realize is even if you look from a job market scenario today, the competencies and skills are blending together. Today, there are far more opportunities, not in AI, but data engineering side of the world, where the folks can do data wrangling or build those data pipes. And even there are more jobs in design thinking, so sociology, psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and anthropology and all, which means that it's eventually blending together to kind of create what I call it art of problem solving for the clients or the companies, because eventually in corporate side of the world, it's the problem solving attitude today which counts.
Okay.
Yeah. I,
Pranjal,
maybe
you want to add something to that?
maybe I can sort of just chip in on that and give you at least what's happening right now. I think personalization, there are two operating models that edtech companies are adopting for personalization. Most edtech companies that I see are trying to solve personalization in-house. They're building products which can capture all the data points so that then the technology can advise the pedagogical engine on what we.
Pranjal, we seem to have lost you.
Yeah.
Okay. While we are waiting for Pranjal to rejoin, there is a question from another of our participants. Sam, I'm going to put this one to you. And Began, in case you want to pitch in after that, please feel free to do that. So, Sam, the question is that a lot of sites are offering self-paced learning modules. So, like Udemy, Pluralsight, Simply Learn, Coursera, etc. And I guess the lady there is asking, how can we leverage these online platforms?
Well, I think the way I look at online platform, it's about with two aspects. One, if you are existing professionals, where exactly we would like to morph and where we are inclined in terms of the next opportunity area, which means relevant or a kind of a visible job opportunities. Along with that, what kind of a courses are available and what those courses then lead to in terms of building skills and competencies. So if we get this stack together, then we know where we are landing in terms of these online programs. Now, thing over there, which is crucial, is content around these online programs more or less is almost similar. I mean, the variations, differentiation is not that much. More important is what's the kind of blending or dovetailing of contextualized learning these online platforms are doing. Do they have mentors? Do they have practitioners? Do they have hackathons, case study, capstone projects? Because that's where the relevancy for a learner to understand where he or she lands on a real time basis comes in, not towards the end of that program. So that's what I'll say at this stage.
So, what I hear you saying is that value-added services, for instance, you mentioned mentorship, would play a vital role in enhancing the value of a lot of these courses. I guess that makes sense. Prachi, in case you have a follow-on question on that, you're welcome to type that in there. Meanwhile, I'm taking another question to Bigyan. Bigyan, the question is that, so the person asking the question is saying that the market is in a mass education situation, right? Secondary higher education. Unfortunately, they do not have devices, and somehow the puzzle of devices needs to be resolved for online to really take off. So it's not really a question. The gentleman has put that as a statement, and he's saying, "What are your thoughts on that?"
Jack, can you repeat because
So they're
your
saying that
voice
the
broke.
puzzle of devices needs to be resolved before
Yeah.
online can really take off. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree, or do you have a different take on that?
So that's a very genuine question, and that's a genuine problem actually. Called SWAM, NPTEL of the Government of India, and the utilization of that portal has gone up by about 7 times in the past 3 months. That shows definitely because of the COVID pandemic effect as such. Also, and I see millions of queries because the last mile connectivity, the lack of devices is a major problem as such. But unless we really resolve that issue, at least at the school level, it's going to be a big issue. Even in my own business school, we face this problem because the students have gone back to their home, and some of them come from tier two cities and all, where the internet connectivity is bad. In fact, let's look at our example here itself. I got I had connectivity issues twice, and I got disconnected. Now the same problem is there in tier two cities, so unless we resolve this problem, and I guess the government is sincerely working on that, and a lot of NGOs, by the way, have actually come forward and started helping students at that level too.
So it's not just
But that has to be
devices.
met before making it.
So I guess it's not just devices. I mean, basic stuff like internet penetration in markets, as well as, you know,
Yeah,
so because I mean, you might have the device, but if the internet penetration is not there, irrespective of
absolutely. What if the electricity is not there?
exactly. So those are
Yeah,
some real life challenges. I see that. I hear what you're saying. Sam, a question
yeah.
for you: how can AI help in the context of sensitive curation of knowledge, coming in at the right time and the right place?
Well, first of all, AI is not a magic wand. I think it needs to be curated with the data, touch points, experiences, and then the engine, which is the algorithm, starts working like a magic and often needs to be fed. So, some of these areas, I'll give an example today. What's now we've discussed enough, and at some point in time, we've been provocative enough on the educational institute side that look, they got to change, they got to adapt, and specific to the question. But this is what some of the institutes have been doing using AI. I've been involved in the past in some of the projects where some of the large universities, without naming them, used to ascertain the dropouts of the students even before they kind of think of moving out, which is their entire social behavior, their entire kind of, let's say, way they interact in the class, the way they kind of talk to the teachers or the faculties, and the way even they kind of, let's say, get assessed. I mean, they perform during those tests. So one is that specific aspects of each and every data point is getting captured today across the value chain of education, from a learner side, from an institute side, and even from a MOOC or platform side. Now, bringing the magic on, let's say, what those data points should be. I'll give an example where some of the academic institutions, even MOOC platforms, are coaching their faculties or experts who are giving those online classes, where the amount of time I raise my hands or my lack of movement during the class in terms of being very static or poker face could be an indication that students are not getting engaged. Now, if you look at today, one of the data points it's come out, I mean, this was a recent study by NCRT, that since we have moved online, majority of the students are saying sum total of their attention span, which used to be 18 months back, just about 23 minutes, have gone up to 39 minutes. Now, that's the window we have to kind of ensure that the next 39 minutes, when it gets elapsed, needs to be refreshed with the kind of a content we are talking about, something interesting coming from the faculty or the instructor side. Now, these are the subtle indication to the point what you asked, what AI can do. It can give those real-time insights and even intelligence back to the learners and academic institutions, what stage the students will drop out, kind of a thing, or be less attentive, and what needs to be done to
More
supplement.
preemptive, more predictive rather than reactionary.
Absolutely.
I think that makes
decision making. Yes.
There is a question from another gentleman where I think they're really getting into a different space, but it's a very relevant question. Welcome back, Pranjal.
About that, the electricity went off, so I had to figure out a way to get back in.
So one of the questions that's just come up is a large number of students in India cannot even afford smartphones. So when we are talking about learning, and especially online learning, how restrictive is this going to be? We've seen internet penetration issues. We just spoke about that a while ago. And now it's even, stuff like smartphones not being accessible to everybody out there. So Pranjal, do you see this restricting, the pace at which online learning could go up, or do you think this is something that could get solved in the near future?
No, I think, to be honest, I think increasingly this will become solvable. Of course, there will be a challenge in the bottom of pyramid where even if smartphones become extremely affordable, they may not be able to afford it. But otherwise, I think I don't see infrastructure becoming a big issue, to be honest. And I don't foresee, lack of smartphones or affordability of smartphones to become a big issue going forward. So yeah, that's definitely not going to be a major bottleneck to solve for, in my view.
So today, Pranjal, India has 9.6 million digital learning users. That's approximately 0.6% of the Indian population. Despite the fact that we have probably one of the largest or highest demographic dividend anywhere in the world,
Yeah.
the number of working population, the people in the working population is the highest anywhere, even compared to China or any other market. So I'm curious, help me understand, given that that's the demographic dividend, the plausible demographic dividend, there is scarcity of devices, smart devices, lack of internet penetration. With all of these factors put together, why would this not be a constraining factor in the growth of online learning for the country?
So I think first of all, I don't know. I don't believe 9.6 is actually the number we should be sort of anchoring on. To give you an example, right? We did a quick dipstick study internally ourselves, and if you look at a space like test prep for government jobs, yeah, which is more democratic in nature than typically if you look at engineering test prep or MBA test prep. There are approximately 6 million applications which come approximately. That's the sort of number, and there are about 3 to 4 million individuals who give those exams every year, and most of them are either learning, are doing supplementary learning or are doing primary learning on online platforms. Right, about 75% of them have actually taken some online course, either free or paid. So I think, and that's just one segment. I'm just giving you an example, right? If you add K-12, there's another one. If you add, so I think if you add the people who are online trying to learn, I think that number is huge. And COVID has only significantly jumped up that number. So I don't think online adoption is a constraining factor. I think Geo coming in and the kind of bandwidth that is available, I'm sure you guys discussed it previously. I don't think that is a constraining factor. We have more than 400 million smartphones already in India, growing at 30% every year.
The growth is actually higher than China.
Yeah. So I don't think that as a constraining factor. So in my mind, I think the constraining factor would typically be, again, on the side of edtech companies, how are they solving for pricing, high quality, right outcomes, and as long as that is getting improved, which I think is getting improved significantly, I don't foresee infrastructure being an issue.
What you're really saying is as fit and companies are really talking to the users in that sense. They should not really be a constraining factor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So if I may jump on that side, so one is just extending on to what Pranjal said. We definitely need something like an Alexa of education in India. Now, as we know, when Alexa was launched, it's a platform, learns through the various dialects, accent, modulation of voice, what each one of us talk to Alexa about. 1% error rate has now been down to just 2 or 3% because it's learned to understand our colloquial languages. Alexa, by the way, is also getting launched in 16 different languages of India. Now think of this, if government and the concerned bodies tie up with Alexa to create a module of education, because the reason of this entire non-proliferation is not about the bandwidth, it's about going vernacular. I mean, where are those 35 million students going who are passing out? I think it's the understanding where most of our 45% of our entire workforce is into agriculture. Now, that's why if you see that if you have to move that particular side of agriculture, thinking of service-oriented kind of economy, then we got to train these working population in the languages where the jobs are available. And English and Hindi being are the two only topmost kind of a thing. So over there, if Alexa can help kind of a thing, saying, okay, we'll start with vernacular and gradually Alexa, then within the regions, we are talking about starts making them convert from, let's say, a Telugu to Hindi or English, or let's say Marathi to English. I think we have solved that puzzle, but it's a massive effort what needs to be done.
I hear you, Sam. I hear you. In fact, that's also where there might be a fair amount of scope for language learning companies. And that's the space where contribution from the Indian entrepreneurs is possibly lower as compared to what we've done in the supplemental education space and the test prep space or the higher education space, online higher education.
Yeah, and Pranjal comes from that world. If you see why the software as a service platforms have really flourished, the Zoos or the Fresh Desk, they've gone vernacular.
Right.
They've completely taken that whole Indian kind of aspect into totality.
Pranjal, there's a question for you from one of the audience members, and that is, which business model would be more profitable and beneficial for the edtech industry, B2B or B2C?
Sorry, which business model is more profitable? Is that what
for the edtech industry, B2B or B2C?
Yeah, no, I think again the there's no straight answer for that. I think the devil lies in the detail, right? Some segments, I think B2C is is more profitable, and in some segments B2B2C is more sort of profitable. But typically what at least we have seen is in the education space, till the time you're able to build a strong brand, your cost of acquisition on the B2C side is very high. And if you look at as I mentioned earlier, right, brand building takes longer in education than in some other sectors because of the long cycle of attribution that happens here. So what we have at least seen is that B2B2C is a smarter way of scaling up initially and more sustainably, right? Because that improves the unit economics of the companies. And as you're able to build your brand or at least build a co-brand, then you can start experimenting with B2C because you get the advantage of lower cost of acquisition. So that's a very generic answer, but of course, depending on the segments that you are in, it can vary. Of course, you all know about Byju's, and they're doing a fantastic job doing primarily B2C, right? So that sort of gives you a sense of difference in segments and potentially hence difference in approaches.
Do you see the cost of acquisition for you in the US market or some of the other Western markets?
So sorry, you would have to repeat that question. I lost you in between. Could you please repeat that?
In the edtech space, do you see the cost of acquisition of users being higher in India versus, say, in the Western markets?
No, not really. I think from a unit economic standpoint, I think it is similar. However, India is more price sensitive, unlike the US. So in the US market, you have higher pricing power and also pricing cushion. If you jack up the price by 5 to 10%, the demand curve doesn't fall steeply there.
Sure.
In India, you don't have that cushion. So from that perspective, I would say that yes, it's easier to build a more profitable business in the US versus in India. In fact, in our thesis, I think what we are basically saying is quote unquote outsourcing of education, where if you have India cost structure and India back end while your front end sits in the US, I think that's a dream case scenario because you can charge US prices and have the US cushion there, but your costs are more or less half of it are sitting in India. So that builds a much profitable business.
Which to a large extent, I'm guessing, is also what one of those companies that you were speaking about have done.
Yes. So that's right. And I think increasingly you will see that. I think so what you see in SaaS, for example, what you're seeing in software, for example, I think, as I told earlier, right, I think outsourcing of education to low-cost geographies and high talent geographies like India, Philippines, etc. That's a very interesting model, and I think I'm hoping that more and more edtech players explore that pathway.
I can't see Dr. Bigyan Verma here. Bigyan, are you there? Because I can't see your video. Okay, I think Bigyan's probably facing challenges with the network. So I'm going to throw this question at you, Sam. There are actually quite a lot of them, so I'm just figuring out a quick one for you. Okay. I'm not sure if either of you are in the right place to answer this, but if not, then just let me know. What should be the spend on training and learning for organizations in terms of percentage? So the person is not asking for absolute figures, especially when it comes to IT services companies. What should be the percentage spend on training and learning? Is that a question that you would want to answer, or is that something that you would want to pass on for the moment?
So I'll just I'll make an attempt, Jack, specifically coming from working with the IT services organization. Now, again, there is no one straight-jacketed answer. If you go to the public domain, you'll find Accenture spending $1 billion on retraining their workforce. Some of these kind of numbers are there in the public domain. But here is the interesting aspect. I know some of these IT services organizations have devised to kind of ascertain the percentage spend on their L&D. One is the L&D budgets are divided by the business units or the business practices. And the sum total of the attrition which happens, as in the churn which happens, and extrapolated with the intake. And then there is a kind of a factorial of how much they're growing every year in terms of a CAGR. And now we put that kind of a model, you get kind of present that particular case to say what should be the learning budget for that unit. And then if you sum total, if there are 10 units in the organization, you get a number which is the sum total of all. But I'm giving it more calibrated because some of these direct kind of, let's say, percentages of spends have stopped or kind of have been kind of really being debated versus the kind of a calculated model which has certain factorials built in.
So Sam, I see NASSCOM putting it at about 5 to 6%. But I hear you, and I see the logic behind what you're saying, and that certainly sounds like a approach that organizations. In fact, that's an approach I have seen organizations taking because we've been working with the IT sector as well, especially the IT services. So I'm hoping that addresses to some extent the question that was asked. Vigyan, welcome back. We have 5 minutes before we wrap up, so I want to put this question to you from one of the audience. I'm going to summarize the question. It's a little long. A lot of online adoption for education has happened during the time of COVID. Do you see this being stable, or do you see this dropping steeply once the COVID situation improves?
I think it will drop steeply and then stabilize in the days to come because people are still trying to figure out which platform, which tool, and let me also tell you, there's a lot of unawareness. Most of the faculty members were not really prepared. They were not even aware. Now, just to give an example, had I proposed that let's go for blended learning 2 years back in any institution, they would have been a minor revolt because people are not ready. But today, there's absolutely no escape from learning the tools, which is still happening. And trust me, people are very, very sincerely learning the nuances. Technology, which is important, Jag. Believe me, more than the technology which they learn very soon, that's not an issue. It's the content development and the delivery. That's the biggest challenge. So just because I know how to log in and how to learn to use the technology, that's not going to make the difference at all.
Among other things that I love about you, Vigyan, prominent amongst those is your use of euphemisms. Minor revolt. I'm guessing that was more like a mutiny, all-out mutiny. But yeah, I hear you.
Maybe Jagmohan, I can maybe chip in. We have one of our portfolio companies in that space called iNurture, which is providing solutions to universities and academic institutions. So maybe I can just sort of add one point there. At least what we are seeing, and bang on to what Dr. Vigyan is saying, I think the challenge is not so much the tech, it is actually the faculty adopting that tech and also the readiness of the content. However, what we are seeing is that increasingly the mindset that was a potential barrier, that mindset has now got broken.
Absolutely.
And the more prolonged this social distancing stroke COVID period is, the lesser the steep fall would be. I think that's the view. I think the bigger challenge, if you ask me, would be from a regulatory standpoint than from an academic institution standpoint. And there, the government, of course, is becoming more and more digital savvy. But that is where I see a challenge, because I, for example, don't see a reason why 30, 40, 50% of the pedagogy cannot shift online. And I think both the sides, both the learner as well as the faculty, would be ready to do it. It's just that the regulation also has to allow it. The credits have to be given, etc. So I think that potentially could be a bigger challenge than tech or
Valid.
faculty.
That's a very valid point, Pranjal. I'm
Very
glad you
true.
brought that up. Also, I think it has to do with, and I'm also trying to address a couple of other questions in this comment. Um, a lot of people, whether it's trainers out there or academicians also, they believe that the difference between a traditional and an online class is that you are doing this virtually. But actually, it's way more than that. The entire approach needs to undergo a change, and to make it more useful. Um, it's simple stuff. You don't do 3-hour sessions. You might want to have them structured very differently. And rather than a one-way talk like a webinar, how do you make it more interactive? So, of course, tech will play a role in that, the kind of learning system that you're using. But the intent needs to be there too. And I think unless the faculties are really open to changing the approach, irrespective of the technology at their disposal, it may still not make it very engaging for people. And engagement is going to really be critical to drive adoption.
Jag, I want to say something here. Can I come in?
Yes, Bigyan. And
Just
after
quickly,
that,
just one quick point. A lot of research have been done, and the conclusion is that most of the faculty members that when they taught actually improve their effectiveness in a traditional mode also. So the gain was when you do well there, you do well here also. So that's what I wanted to say.
Right. Okay. Here is the last question, and I'll leave it to the three of you to decide which of you wants to pick it up. How do we take learning and skilling down to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where skilling and upskilling is directly required? Which of you wants to do the honors?
Sorry,
Can I come in? Yeah.
Sure, Pranjal. So, from a perspective of solving the problem of employability, how can you take learning and skilling to tier 2 and tier 3 cities? That's how I'm summarizing the question.
Okay, understood.
I think SWAM portal is in that direction only. The NPTEL SWAM of Government of India, and wherein top class professors from IIMs and IITs have many videos, and even the Government of India has also recently, I'm sure you also know that they've allowed almost about 200 plus universities to go online, instead of having a very kind of sticky requirements as such. And on top of that, SWAM. And another thing is like I mentioned earlier also, and you also know it, that credit transfer. If you do a couple of, you do courses on SWAM, you can actually those transcripts. That's also a possibility, and I think that's a way you can make it scalable and take it to the deepest possible corner of our country as such. That's the only way we can democratize education here in the country.
Thanks, Priya.
I have a maybe potentially a different angle to this, right? I think if you ask me for tier 2, tier 3, the kind of players which will solve the skilling problem are actually going to be new age staffing companies and gig companies. Guys like Asan Jobs, Tap Chief and other gig platforms, because they Better Place, etc., right, which are focusing on that segment. I see them solving this much more proactively and faster, because they are leading to direct employment for the candidates, and the candidates will keep on latching on to those platforms, and I know that they are now trying to improve the skill capabilities of the candidates to get there. So I think it's not going to be the pure edtech companies, but actually staffing companies which are having learning as a key feature, solving for this.
Or Pranjal, a model where a certain type of edtech company is able to collaborate with some of these organizations that you're talking
Absolutely, absolutely, you're right.
and is able to bring in low-cost solutions to them, which would also, be a result of the kind of tech that they're employing at the back end.
Yeah.
Low-cost solution backed by highly outcome-based learning, synergized with the industry from a employability perspective, that could possibly also make it.
Bang on. And I think the point I was trying to make is that in the model, you need to first get the employer on board, and once you have the employer on board, right, then it becomes easier, it becomes more affordable, and also exciting for the candidates. So whether it is in-house or through partnerships with edtech companies like you're mentioning, I think that makes absolute sense. Yes.
So Yani, I hope we were able to address your question as well. In order to conserve time, I'm just addressing the second part of your question directly here, which is how participants are able to demonstrate collaborative learning as well as engagement through the online or the virtual program. That might also be one of the parameters for grading them, apart from the ones that you've mentioned. I would like to thank Bigyan, Pranjal, Sam for taking out time. I know all of you have very crunch schedules, but thank you for joining in. It's been a very scintillating conversation, at least for me, with all of you. And I would also like to thank all the people who were able to take out time to attend the webinar. We will, of course, be putting up a link of this on social media, and therefore it will be accessible there as well. This has been brought to you through Talgro, which is essentially in the business of empowering individuals to be more career ready. And I would like to thank Subramanian over here for setting this up as well. So Subbu, thank you so much. Before I give it to Subbu, I would just like to say thank you again. And whether you're at work or at home, continue being safe and continue learning. Thank you so much.